Good morning and a very warm welcome to you from the Newsfirst studios in Dawson Street in Colombo, and this is Newsline. Joining me this morning in the absence of poor Bandara Jayasekara, who is taken ill, is Professor Rajiva Vijayasinghe, the former parliamentarian, author, critique and political analyst, I suppose. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning, Faz.
And how are you today?
Fine. I just managed to do my walk before I got here. So
excellent, excellent. Very good. And also joining us here is the former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, Mr. W.A. Vijayawardena. Very good morning to you.
Yes, same to you.
And thank you very much for being on the show. Professor, we'll start with you then. President Sirisena's undertaking at the funeral of the Venerable Sobhito Thera. Interesting?
Well, I think it is certainly evidence that the President is still very determined to introduce structural changes. But I think it's also important that both the President and those who advise him, and I hope he now has better advisors than Ranil Wickremesinghe, look at the principles of governance and the whole question of separation of powers. You see, one of the basic problems with Sri Lanka is that we haven't looked at authoritarian power, which is wrong, whether it's in the hands of a president or prime minister. So I think it's important that as we move towards more transparency and accountability, we set in place the structures of control. The executive, whether it's the president or the prime minister, must be controlled. It's not a question of who is the executive power. It's a question of who sits above the executive power. And that should be Parliament, a strengthened Parliament. Sadly, nothing was done to strengthen Parliament, despite our commitment, despite our promises, despite the manifesto on which the President fought the election.
It's interesting what you say about the separation of powers. Because we can interpret that from the matter, the so-called avant-garde matter. Because we clarified this with an official of the Ministry of Defence, and what they've done and what the President has ordered is that he has directed that the Sri Lankan Navy take possession and control of the weapons, and therefore the custody of those weapons and so on will be vested with the Sri Lankan Navy. He has also asked for whatever arrangements there are between the Ministry of Defence and Rakna Araksha Lanka, which is a company owned by the government, to be cancelled, put on hold. So in essence, he has taken the wind out of the sails, and people are, I think, quite happy that this state of affairs has now finally been put into place. So there's a clear separation. The President has not cancelled an agreement between two private companies, albeit that one is owned by the government, i.e. Rakna Araksha and Avant-Garde. We also treated with the news that Avant-Garde will be launching their own robust defence of their version sometime today at a press conference. So, Professor, good governance seems to be in play now.
Well, I think what the President has done, and I'm glad you clarified that, does make sense, but underlying it is the fact that we still don't go on the principles that COPE, under the chairmanship of Gunasekara. For the first time, COPE actually looked at the underlying problems. Right. The underlying problem here is the fact that some years back people realized government was inefficient. Because government, when it entered into business, was not functioning in accordance with the way business should function. Now, to me, the answer should have been to actually streamline government. AR and FR should have been actually aligned with the modern world. But instead of doing that, in the 90s, the theory emerged, it happened all over the world, of setting up private companies. Now, those private companies tended, like Ratna, to be owned by the government, and they, in theory, were also subject to audit and transparency. Then they decided that's not working. Now, this has happened not only with regard to this Ratna Avant-Garde, but in the road industry. We found when we were in court.
So Avant-Garde is a separate company.
No, what I mean is that then Ratna makes another fully private company or initiates that, so that there's no nexus between Avant-Garde and government, the point you just made.
Yeah.
So government can't cancel those contracts.
Yeah.
We had the same thing in roads, that you have a roads department. Then they set up various companies under the roads department. We fought like hell to make sure that those companies came before Parliament. Then there were other companies, and as the link got weaker, they said, we are not responsible, we mustn't come before Parliament. Yesterday I had a situation where Minister Mahinda Samarasingham said very clearly, we have problems with companies set up by government money, they must be accountable to government. But what has happened? They have been changed and wholly privatized.
Yeah.
Now the problem with Avant-Garde is it was using government resources, which it got through Ratna, but was not accountable. Now what we need is a whole streamlining of system.
They're accountable within the Companies Act.
Exactly, but the point is they should be accountable also to government insofar as they benefit from government resources. That is what accountability is about.
Yes, but
now,
it's
since
not
they
there.
get
It's not. To be fair, they haven't done anything wrong in that respect.
I don't think they have done anything wrong, but what I'm saying is the manner in which Ratna entered into an agreement with them whereby they used the resources supplied by government, which government gave Ratna, that should have been subject to review.
Quite.
And my whole point is government must, we had suggested it, Pope has said it for 3 years, AR and FR must be re-examined. The government system must be brought into line with the modern world so that it can function effectively. Any subsidiary company should be allowed freedom of movement but accountability. One basic problem is that the Freedom of Information Act, which should lie at the roots of all good governance, which we promised in the manifesto of January to come in a month, has been completely ignored. Nothing was done about it except for a draft in April. I suspect I'm the only one who responded to the draft and said bring it quickly. They ignored it. 3 months have passed since the new government was formed. Nothing has come about transparency or indeed the Audit Act. These are essential, and I'm glad the President is now going to act, because I think the most important thing is that I think the leading member of the government who's committed to good governance, the President, as opposed to the Prime Minister, must take the reins and say, I promise these things, I am the President, I must fulfill my promises.
Absolutely. And we're so hopeful and encouraged by the President's strong move here. But let me just ask you, Mr. Vijayawardena, this is not anything to do with your expertise at the central bank, but as a citizen of Sri Lanka, what did you feel of this extraordinary funeral, the first state funeral, I believe, for an ordinary citizen, for Reverend Sobhita Thero? Were you really happy that this man's efforts has been recognized?
Well, of course, according to the story that Reverend Sobhita never wanted a state funeral. He was a simple man. He actually wanted a very simple funeral arrangement after his death. So what has happened is, because there was a big cry for recognizing his contribution to democratizing the entire country in the recent past. So nation wanted to recognize the services that he has rendered, therefore there was a state funeral. But of course, as Raju had just mentioned, President has promised that he would continue to implement the wishes of Reverend Sobhita, because he wanted to have a civilized society, corrupt-free government, and also a society which is accountable to what it does. Just society, and it accountable to what it does. So that is the main point that we have to start, and from there we have to build up a new nation. Now about this avant-garde thing about which Raju had mentioned, I have to say that even in 1970s, Dr. N.M. Pera was highly critical of this government-owned company because he said they don't come before parliament. And he didn't want any public money to be invested in a government-owned company.
I think he was absolutely right,
Yeah.
because in this instance, we have an investment of 50%
Yeah.
of all costs by Ratna
Even
Raksha.
51%
But
because when you...
it's 50%, but
Yeah.
the return is only 35%, and
Yeah.
it was reduced to 28%.
Yeah. So so this particular issue of, because we are now faced with having a better economic management in the country, where the enterprises should be able to do it in a flexible manner. So to bring that flexibility, we must think of either, as Rajiv has said, either reforming modifying the financial regulations and administrative regulations under which the public authorities have to be operated, or to make them accountable in addition to COPE. We must have another parliamentary standing committee that would look at the affairs of the companies owned by the government of Sri Lanka.
Yes.
Can I just add to that what we did in COPE,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and you're going to say, said, if government money is there, subsidy or not, they must come before parliament.
Yeah.
And that was agreed. So we got, now Sri Lanka Cricket tried to tell us they can't come. We damn well got them there, because the principle Yugunasekara had, and I fully agree with what NM said,
Yeah.
is if government money is there, they must be accountable. But of course, my second point is you have to train more people. I mean, COPE had 31 members, only 10 of us used to go there. So you have to train the parliamentarians in actually making sure that they know how to enforce accountability. That is also essential.
It's interesting what you say about this, but Mr. Marapana has done the, shall we say, the honourable thing, and he has tendered his resignation. All very well and said and done and all that, and we don't mean to take anything away from him. But is it fair that it's only that this entire episode is hung on Tilak Marapana, and so he's resigned, so this matter can be finished? Is that fair? Shouldn't any other resignations follow?
No, I think you said one of the good things about Marapana's resignation is that it's, I think, the first time that you have had someone taking responsibility for wrong and resigning since, I think, George Rajapaksa resigned way back in 1962. Nisanka Wijeratna, I think, also resigned about the prison massacre. But we have never had a tradition of people taking responsibility in this country. So I think it's a very good thing. I think there are two issues. One is the symbolic fact. It's a bit like I used to keep telling Mahinda Rajapaksa when he was president to prosecute things like the Trinco 5. And the AG told me we won't get a conviction. I said that's not the point. The point is you have to show that government thinks this is wrong. So Marapana's resignation is that. But the second thing is the remedial action to make sure that the violations of principles of accountability and transparency are stopped. For that you need structural change. You need structural change in terms of the way in which accountability to Parliament is enforced. You need to do what we tried. In fact, I got it through the Standing Orders Committee, that COPE recommendations must be followed by government, or government will explain why they're not following them. At the moment, COPE is toothless. We make recommendations, government ignores them. Now, Sri Lanka is the only country in the world where parliamentary oversight has become a joke because nobody takes notice of what we recommend. So all those changes need to be made, and I hope that Marapana, now not in office, will say we must do things. As a footnote, I think
let us time to take a break. Do stay tuned. When we come back, we'll discuss the bond, the highways, the stock exchange, and lots more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Newsline. This morning with Professor Rajiv Vijayasinghe and Mr. W. Vijay former Deputy Governor of the Central Bank, Sri Lanka. So, is it fair that we just have only Mr. Marapana resigning?
Well, I think what's most entertaining about it is his replacement.
Right.
I think it's very entertaining that we have that.
Okay, but I want to say this. It's fabulous news that that a matter that has gripped the imagination of the country in terms of Raksha Lanka and avant-garde appears to have been put down with some firm action, firm decision. However, what of the bond, the highways, the stock exchange, matter against the SEC, its former chairman and his assistant? We were told that the police department had put that prosecution on hold because of the elections, because apparently the SEC chairman, Nalaka Godaheva, had claimed that he was politically involved and therefore shouldn't, this was deemed as political. But the election is long gone, and no action. We are not treated to any information on that. And then there is the matter of 22 cases that, or 22 files that the Attorney General's Department is sitting on for want of a decision. Apart from one case in which the former chairman of the TRC and another official have been indicted over a 600 million rupee SIL-ready matter, there has been no other indictment. We've had lots of people, Professor, who've gone to been remanded, as was Basil Rajapaksa, Sajinwas Gunawardena, and that's about it. So they go into remand and come out via the hospital, but that's it. So when does this when does this circus stop?
I don't think the circus will stop while we have principles totally violated, complete forgetting of the manifesto. I think underlying this all, however, is a question of what we are looking for. What we seem to be looking for now is a game of atrocity snap. For instance, here you have a situation where we all know that there was corruption under the last government. We all know there is corruption under this government. You have mentioned some of the instances like the central bank bond issue, like the highways. But I think the answer is to bring in measures that will stop this. Now, this was what we recommended. There was a Minister for Democratic Governance. I made several suggestions. For instance, take what has been stolen from the nation. The important thing is for the nation to get it back. What we should have done was introduce transparency with regard to things like assets declarations, thrown them open to the public, asked for reports, but also told people, if you give the money back, we'll give you an amnesty. And then set up measures to prevent this happening in the future. What is the point of prosecuting A if after the next election we then have to prosecute B? We have to stop this type of thing happening. I think the great tragedy of this government is it has completely ignored the promises of the President's manifesto. I think, as you said, when the President asserts himself, there is a suggestion that things might get better, but he must set in place structural changes now, not simply engage in this game of snap.
We are treated from time to time by our dear Prime Minister on some remarkable matters. When he almost started his innings, his fourth innings, or maybe it was during his third innings, he named and in effect shamed some businessmen in Parliament and within the sanctity of Parliament, and what I mean is with the parliamentary privileges. So these gentlemen who have not been were unable to respond, but yet, in spite of what the Prime Minister said, not one of those names that he mentioned have we seen them in court. So it appears to me that there is merely a PR exercise. Is it apparent to you that is what is going on?
I think we have the expert, Mr. Vijay.
Well, okay, let's ask Mr. Vijay Warden about the...
I'll answer that after he's finished.
About the bond. Let's say, hypothetically, of course, that we want to halt this bond. Is there a way that you can halt it?
No, actually, once the bond has been issued by the government of Sri Lanka, they are called sovereign bonds.
Yeah.
So what we mean by sovereign bonds is once it is issued, it is issued.
Yeah.
And the members of the public who have invested in the money, they have already invested.
Yeah.
But there's a secondary market in these bonds, and the original investors who had invested in the particular bond that we are referring to
Yeah.
have sold them now to other people, other investors.
Right.
And they are no longer in the hands of the people
Of the original investor.
who have invested originally in the bonds. Therefore, you cannot now punish the people who have now purchased it from the market. So what should be done is, as the Prime Minister had promised in Parliament, he had said that he would appoint a parliamentary select committee to investigate into the bond affair and also all the
other bonds too.
Other mishappenings in the Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Not only bonds, the mishappening in the Central Bank of Sri Lanka in the last 10-year period. That select committee has to be appointed, and the select committee should be given a very clear mandate.
Yeah.
And its terms of reference should be very clearly stated that it has to investigate into the matters that are being required by Parliament. And once the committee reports back to Parliament, it's up to Parliament to take the necessary action.
Right.
So without that, I don't think anyone can accuse anybody of any wrongdoing which is not fair.
Professor, I'm going to put this question to you. It's from a viewer. People who used EPF monies should be punished. Can Ranil, the Prime Minister, run the government with Sagala, Akila, Malik and Mahendran?
Well, I think Ranil can do anything he likes at the moment and does so. But you asked the question earlier, and I think what people have to realize is that the nexus between what Ranil Wickremesinghe says and what he does is non-existent. He said he would appoint something to look into the bond issue.
Indeed.
Nothing has happened. He said, and I think this is important because I've been reading the papers recently, people like Vasantha Aliwihare, who did very well in elections, are completely ignored. Ranil said that depending on your performance, he would give you positions.
Yes.
Now, who gets appointed a minister? Sagala Ratnayaka, who came third. Buddhika Patane is completely ignored.
Indeed.
I think you will find that Ranil says what comes into his head, and which is getting worse. You know, some of his recent parliamentary pronouncements are really rather sad. Now, I think if your primary motive in life is to provide jobs for your friends, the names you mentioned come to mind. Marapana was a friend, but perhaps Sagala is a greater friend. So then you give them jobs. You don't look for the suitability. I was told by one senior educationist, they were delighted that Akila Viraj was appointed Minister of Education, because they said it's so clear he can't do the job, Ranil will do the job himself, and Ranil was a good minister. But Ranil has no time to do all this. You know, we discovered recently that I think he still has.
So do you think that's the same with the law and order ministry?
Well, of course. I mean, the minute you appoint Sagala Ratnayaka, it's even more your poodle than Marapana was. You know, it's all very sad because I still remember what happened in 2003 when Ranil wanted to stop English media. And I said, how can you do this? And he said, no, I have no time to do it. I'm now doing the economy. And I said, is there no one else who can do this? And he said, no one else can do it. So he thinks he can do everything. And at the age of 66, you have to realize he was a good youth minister. You can't be running youth at 66.
I want to quickly ask, we've got about 4 or 5 minutes left at the moment. Mr. Wijewardene, do you know, when you say that others bought into this bond, but there was a huge public outcry about this at the time. It was given the widest possible publicity, and yet people should have, it should have been a question of buyer beware, because they knew there was a problem and they bought it. So if the government takes a stance and says, well, we're going to retire this now, and we'll settle up, is that a possible scenario? Can we retire?
Well, yeah,
early?
I mean, any bond issued by the government of Sri Lanka, the government has the power to recall it for repayment early, before maturity.
I can almost bet my bottom dollar that the powers that be have not been told this by the Prime Minister, because perhaps the powers that be presume that you can't do anything else about it.
Yeah, but of course it's not a good precedent, because once...
No, it isn't. But it is a good precedent, don't you think, that if the public are told that, look, you know this thing's wrong, and whilst we're trying to sort it out, if you've gone and bought it, well, there's a certain amount of buyer beware. involved
No,
in that.
no. In the case of public debt, no, it doesn't happen because once the bond has been issued, they are in the market.
Right.
And
But we can retire.
no, we can retire provided the government has a good financial strength. Normally it happens when the government has a surplus in the budget.
Right.
Now if Minister Ravi Karunanayake comes up with a surplus in the current budget,
Yeah.
which is going to introduce on 20th,
Yeah.
then the government has money to retire the bonds.
Mhm.
The bond retirement, early bond retirements are effected only when the governments have a surplus in money. But this government doesn't have surplus, and therefore the question of isolating a single bond
Yes.
and retiring will not
In the event,
yeah.
hypothetically again, but
Yeah.
in the event that
Yeah.
the president of the country summons you and asks you for your advice and says, how can I stop this bond? Would you give him
I
early
say
retirement
no.
as one
No,
option?
No, early retirement I will give the option only if the government has surplus money,
Right.
not without surplus money.
I see. All right. That's almost final. But Rajiv, you're holding a book. What is this book that you're...
Well, I'm very glad you asked that, because for many years, when I ran the academic part of the degree program at the Military Academy, I said one of the things we need is analysis.
Right.
We
And this
must
book
write
is?
about our wars. This is a book, I think the first, written by an officer in the army, a commando, about the Elam War.
Right.
And I think it's extremely important. It's called Echo Group by Major Hamid. And it's the first time that an officer has written about experiences. Other countries do this. After
Yes,
IPKF,
yes.
6 people wrote. And I hope people read this because they'll realize what enormous sacrifices were made by forces who have been insulted by the foreign minister, who says they did appalling atrocities,
Yes.
but under political pressure. These are the people who saved this country, and people must
And
read
they
it and
must read it and
understand
find
and
out. True.
respect what was done.
Thank you very much. On that note, sadly we've run out of time. So thank you, Mr. Wijewardena, for sharing your expertise with us. And Professor, thank you very much for being on our show. You've been here a long time this morning. Thank you very much. And thought for the day: defeat only happens when you stop believing. On that note, from a very wet morning at the Newsline studios here from Newsfirst, thank you for having watched, and have a good morning. Take care.